Hello everyone and welcome. This is Mary Magnuson and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on the 2017 Legislative Preview. This is one in a series of monthly webinars Blandin Foundation offers for our Blandin broadband communities and open to anyone with an interest in using technology to improve community. Before we begin, I'll point to the chat box on the lower left corner of your screen. To interact with us at any time during today's webinar, you can simply type your question or comment in the chat box. And now let's get started. Again, my name is Mary Magnuson. I work here at the Blandin Foundation and I administer the Blandin Community Broadband Program. Joining me today is Bill Coleman of Community Technology Advisors, who I'm sure many of you know. Bill has been Blandin Foundation's primary broadband program consultant for a number of years. Bill is going to introduce today's speakers and moderate the webinar. Our speakers today are Brent Christensen of Minnesota Telecom Alliance, Laura Ziegler of the League of Minnesota Cities, Steve Fenske from the Minnesota Association of Townships, and Mark Erickson, who is with the City of Winthrop, RS Fiber, and probably more. Take it away, Bill.
Thank you, Mary. As we know, the legislative session now is in full swing. We've hit the ground running on a number of issues, and we wanted to touch base and look forward to between now and May to see what's happening at the Capitol in terms of broadband issues, and especially broadband for rural Minnesota. Today we've got kind of a two-part webinar. Part one, we're going to hear from Brent Christensen, and Brent is president of the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, or MTA. He's a veteran state capitol activist for many years and comes from a family enterprise down in Medelia, Minnesota, Christensen Communications. So he's got copper in his blood there, maybe some fiber too. And Brent's going to provide, from the industry perspective, his preview of what's going to happen at the Capitol this year. So welcome, Brent.
Thank you. Is that my cue to start?
It is.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this in the webinar. First one I've done like this, so it's kind of a new experience for me. I was given 20 minutes to kind of talk about what's going on at the industry, and had this been last session, that would not have been enough. But we got a lot of things done last session, and I'm going to talk about one of them that relates to broadband, and then kind of talk a little bit about what we're looking at from an industry perspective for this session, and then kind of where we are on the whole broadband grant program. So one of the biggest things the obstacles that we've had to deal with for the last several years had to do with railroad crossings, and we were successful last session in getting a bill passed that streamlined that process. And as MTA member companies and any utility upgrade their facilities and expand their networks, crossings are obviously a big part of what we do. We've been charged from the railroads. We've got horror stories. One of the longest standing one was Garden Valley Telephone wanted to take fiber to the Boston City Hall, and that was the only customer they were going to do. And to get a railroad permit to do that would have cost $72,000 over 20 years. And it doesn't take long to figure out that you can't make enough in monthly revenue to pay just for the railroad crossing. So that was negotiated down by the company, and they were able to do that for $9,000, which is still quite a bit of money. Under the new system, everyone has the right under state law to be in a public right-of-way. Railroads were charging for those, and they are not charging for that anymore. So it established a one-time fee of $1,250 to cross rail facilities on private property, and then zero for crossing rail facilities in public right-of-way where all utilities have a right to be. So that was a big, we think, a big win. We see it as a big win in the last session. So this session, we've got a few things that are going on. One of them is something that we've been working on. For anybody that works in and around the Capitol, you know almost nothing happens at one at a time or in one session. It takes long. maybe multiple sessions to get legislation passed. And something we've been working on since 2013 is a sales tax exemption on fiber, conduit, wire, cable, and poles. In 2013, the legislature removed an exemption that telephone companies had for sales tax on capital equipment purchases for the central office, and along with the tax bill, along with a lot of other things. We were able to work with other industry stakeholders and get that reinstated, and all of it was reinstated and expanded with the exception of fiber, conduit, wire, cable, and poles. And so we've been working since then to get that included in it. We're the only industry that pays sales tax on capital expenditures of this type, and so we're trying to get that to be included, and we'll be working on that this session. The other thing that we're working on this session is a bill that would expand the personal income tax deduction for educational expenses to include broadband. This was a bill that we had first introduced in 2011, and as you are probably aware, that you can deduct up to $1,000 per year for educational expenses from your personal state income tax, such things as books, tuition, other educational expenses. And so we felt the time was right and the environment was right for us to dust off a bill from 2011 and reintroduce that bill. And so basically it would add monthly broadband subscription service to the list of things that you can deduct from your annual tax, personal income tax at the state level. The trick in this is, how do you do that? Because a lot of people have bundles. They bundle their internet service with other things on their telephone or cable bill. So how do you figure that out? And so what we're proposing is just to put in a dollar amount into the bill. So it would be, what we're proposing to start with is up to $25 a month can be deducted for a year. So it's $300 a year of that $1,000 total deduction. It doesn't actually raise the deduction level. It just allows you to add that monthly broadband subscription, because as we're deploying broadband around the state, we think adoption is a big part of it, and providing some incentives for education, I think, is a big part of that. So those are really the only two bills that we are actively pursuing this session. We are obviously very involved in the broadband grant program, and I'm sure the other presenters are going to be spending a lot of time talking about that as well. The grants were announced yesterday, as I'm sure you're aware. 42 grants were awarded. Of those 42, 31 went to MTA member companies, in either directly or through a partnership with another entity. And we have said all along, we believe that's the recipe for success if you want to get to broadband into rural areas. And I think the last 3 rounds of grant program have kind of strengthened that position, if you will. We're very excited about this round of grants awards, and think that it has gone to really providing border-to-border broadband. We as an association have never advocated for the size of the grant fund. We have felt that's best left up to the legislators and to figure out how much money that they can put into the grant program, considering all the other demands on the grant, demands on state money and surplus money. We have been very focused on where the grants should go and the rules around them. And we worked very closely with the other stakeholders 3 years ago for the first round of criteria for them. And a couple things that are kind of, or we feel are very important. First of all, any state money needs to go to places that have no broadband today. And we are very focused on unserved and making sure that money goes to unserved parts of the state. Scalability is another issue that we have been very actively supporting, and that is that anything that's put in the ground using state grant money needs to be scalable to 100 by 100. This is very important because you hear a lot of arguments, well, you put something in the ground and you're building to 10-1 and then you're done. that's not the way this works, and like Bill said, I have a little bit of a background in the industry, so I will tell you that when you build a network, it isn't one and done. I mean, you're continually upgrading, you're continually enhancing networks. And if you think about where broadband started in Minnesota and the first internet connection to where we are now, it has grown by leaps and bounds and exponentially every year. So you have to be prepared for that. We believe in our industry that you always have to be at least one step ahead of the customer's needs. If you're 2 steps ahead, you're at the bleeding edge and you can't pay for it. And if you're even with them, you're too late. So we work very hard and our members work very hard to be always a step ahead of the customer's needs. And we think that is reflected in the scalability requirement in the program. There were, in this last round of grants, there were some new twists, if you will, that were put into play. Some of them that I think need to be refined a little bit, in our opinion. One of them is the whole letter of intent at the very beginning. That was intended in the beginning, and it was not our issue. We didn't promote it. It started off as a right of first refusal, and we worked very hard with the authors to get it to be a letter of intent, and it was intended to spark conversations between existing providers and their local communities. It didn't work that way in just about any case, and in a couple cases it did, but in most cases it didn't, and it was seen as a right of first refusal when it never was. So we want to work with the legislature to make sure that we smooth that process out, and if they still want that to stay in there, then it needs to be communicated better so that people understand that it is just a letter of intent and a conversation starter, not as a second challenge process, as some people had thought. I think the way the grants were awarded and that they went out, I think that proves that they were part of the decision-making process, but not all of it, as was the challenge process at the end, which was the same as previous years. It was just spelled out in statute instead of put out by the Office of Broadband Development. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed and tweaked, and we're certainly going to be working with other stakeholders and with the legislature to make sure that gets communicated better. The other issues that we have, I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about that from the other presenters, are around the difference between grants going to unserved versus underserved. I think we've made it very clear that we have focused on unserved, and that's where our members are focused on now, and we think that state grant dollars should go. We understand that there's going to be a mix of unserved and underserved as grants are put together and awarded, and I think the grants that were awarded reflect that mix of both, and in the same grants. And so I think long term, I think that's going to be a good deal. And then, quite frankly, we had an issue with the whole definition of underserved. 100 by 20 is a goal that the state has by 2026. It created a false ceiling, if you will, in our opinion, about the grants, but it turned out to be not an issue this round. So, we probably aren't going to say a whole lot about that if that stays in the next round. So that's kind of the grant awards from our perspective. I don't have enough good words to say from our members, having dealing with the Office of Broadband Development and the staff there, and the way that they have administered the last 2 rounds of grant applications, and the level of communication and the ability to pick up the phone and make a call and get an answer has been outstanding from the onset of the program. And over the past 3 years, our members have gotten, probably 60% or 75% of the grant awards. So we have a lot of experience working through the processes, and the Office of Broadband Development has been a fantastic partner in all of that. So we look forward to that and to working with them going forward.
Brent?
Let's see. Maybe we should do some questions?
Yep, Brent, we do have one question so far, and it's from Janet Keogh, who lives due north of Duluth in rural St. Louis County. And she says, given that the CAF 2 only requires 10.3 10 down, 3 up, is that MTA position that the partnerships with the broadband grants can get projects closer to 100? Or do you think, so, or she's saying that legislators kind of, the ones she talks to, don't necessarily think there should be a blending of the deed border-to-border money with the CAF 2 money. Maybe, hopefully I got that right. Any take on that?
Okay, I'll see if I can answer that, Janet. Well, first of all, it's 10-1, but it's an easy mistake to make because the FCC has not exactly been clear on their definitions of broadband. But the CAF 2 for price cap companies is different than CAF 2 for the rate of return companies. But in this case, your question about the CAF 2, my comment about the 100 by 100 is that anything that the state spends money on, in our opinion, needs to be scalable to 100 by 100. So it may not start out at 100 by 100, and we think that broadband grants can either be used to do that or to expand the amount of customers that can get better broadband speeds. So 10 by 1 might be the FCC requirement now, and that might be the person at the end of the line who might get that, but as you get back closer to the central office, those speeds go up. And so shortening that distance between the end user and the central office is the goal of everybody who's trying to deploy broadband. I don't know if that answers your question.
I have a question for you. The 100 by 100 seems to me at this point to really require kind of a 100% fiber solution. Would you agree with that?
I'm not going to, you know, every time I say yes to that question, then I get some microwave or other providers that jump up and chew me out for it. So that's what it would appear to me in a landline environment, but you know, they're doing 100 by 100 with microwave and other technologies, so I think I'm going to stay out of that one. Okay,
good enough. And I don't doubt the ability of engineers to do things with copper as well. So Mark Johnson from Knabec Broadband Initiative comments that I think the greater issue is that some legislators think CAF 2 is going to mostly solve rural broadband issues. Does the MTA think that 10.1 is some mix of between 10.1 and 25.3 is going to be a long-term broadband solution for rural Minnesota?
No, not if it stays like that, but it doesn't. You know, I don't get into the speed debate because I'm interested in getting something everywhere, and I'm not gonna say it's adequate or and I don't do that with legislators either. I don't get into that. The governor's got a plan to get, and it is called a border-to-border broadband grant, and so we need to do what we can to get broadband to everybody, and then make sure that it's scalable to meet the needs of the future. I mean, that's the bottom line. So it's a little more tricky now talking to legislators, particularly after the recent election. You know, we got $35 million in this year, and I think part of that came from the fact that this was an election year. There were some things that were meant to help us and help bring broadband as an issue in the election, and unfortunately, in my opinion, it backfired. For instance, House DFL members went around the state and had meetings. Matt Schmidt, when he was in the legislature, went around the state and had meetings and talked about broadband. And the House DFL in particular, thought that was a way to gain support in the election cycle. And unfortunately, it fell flat on its face. Then you take the fact that, you know, the Senate DFL, Senator Schmidt had a press conference and he wanted $85 million for broadband last year, and he had a couple senators standing up there with him. Well, what happened was the leadership in the DFL leadership in the Senate didn't put any money in broadband grants. They had the press conference, but they ended up not putting any money in the beginning. And all the senators that stood up with Senator Schmidt, including Senator Schmidt, lost. So that has huge repercussions through the House and the Senate. That this wasn't the election topic that they thought it was. And that, in my mind, is going to make our lives a lot more difficult trying to get interest in funding for broadband. I just don't see any way, with all the other things going on with healthcare and Real ID and everything else going on at the Capitol right now, that there's going to be a lot of appetite on either side of the aisle for broadband now because of the election. So that's going to make our lives a lot more difficult, a lot more challenging trying to promote that and trying to get that going forward.
That's interesting.
But it's like anytime I have a
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off, sir.
I was just going to say, I say that with the same thought that I say everything when I talk to my wife, and I finish that off with, in my opinion.
That's very wise. Very wise. Well, and that is, as we think about broadband, and as the number of people who have broadband go up that meet the state broadband standard, certainly the voices of those who don't have broadband either have to shout much more loudly, or they're just not necessarily going to get heard. So I thought about that just yesterday as I looked at several counties, Candy, Ojai, and Martin, and Nobles County. Will soon, in a year, have 100% coverage. Those are 3 less counties to lobby for broadband expenditures, so that is a challenge, no doubt. Brent, any final words?
Well, and yeah, I would have to say that for members of the community that are those broadband advocates that are trying to improve broadband in where they live and work, they're going to have to get creative. There's going to have to be partnerships. I think we've proven over the last few years what partnerships work and what ones don't, and that's strictly by who's gotten the broadband out there and who hasn't. And I think that they're going to have to keep their eyes on what's working, and I don't think they're going to be able to depend on the legislature to put as much money as they have been putting into it for the next few years. I don't think the grant program is going to go away. At least I hope not. And I think it's going to be around, and I think it's demonstrated that it has worked to get broadband where it's just not feasibly possible to get it any other way. So that's all I have.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for participating. It's a crazy place up there at the Capitol. I don't understand it at all, so I give a lot of kudos to folks we have on our panels today to sharing their wisdom. So thank you, Brent. The next group, we have 3 representatives of rural Minnesota Community Broadband. Laura Ziegler from the League of Minnesota Cities, Steve Fenske from the Minnesota Association of Townships, and Mark Erickson with the City of Winthrop, and also either current or past board member of the Minnesota Municipal Utilities Association. Welcome to our 3 guests. Everyone there, can you check in with us? Laura?
I am here. This is Mark. He's still here.
Still here.
Oh, good. Good. And so I've got some little slides here. Mary, can you switch? There we go. And so this is really from the community perspective. And one of the things that we found out as we talk broadband with the rural advocates is that broadband is incredibly important to everyone. The schools, the healthcare associations, the League of Cities, the counties, the townships, rural economic development groups. But, broadband might not be their #1 topic. They like to focus on topics that are more dear to their hearts, like funding formulas for roads or school formulas for per student funding and so on. But broadband is an essential infrastructure, and everyone recognizes that. And so we've had rural advocacy groups now convening for about a little more than a year to really put the focus on broadband throughout the rural advocacy message. We've spent time developing a sharing a unified message that this is a platform for economic development and service delivery. We also lack that identifiable statewide advocacy group. We don't have a formal broadband advocacy group. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how important this is, and maybe we'll take just a few minutes to talk about this work. Laura, you've hosted a lot of our meetings. Do you want to talk about why you see this is so important for rural folks to work together?
Sure, Bill. This is Laura Ziegler from the League of Minnesota Cities. I just wanted to thank the Blandin Foundation as well for the invitation to be with you all today, and for those that are listening in. We really see this issue. I started with the League back in 2012, and so that's when a lot of the issue of broadband really got a lot of traction in 2013 at the legislature. And from a League perspective, it's been a priority of ours as well since 2013. We do work on a wide array of issues. Anything that cities work on, we cover at the Capitol. And to your point, cities and what we hear from our members through our extensive policy development process is that high-speed internet is essential infrastructure needed by cities and anyone to compete in a global economy. And so that's the premise of our work. And so I really see this, if you're working on the premise that it's essential infrastructure, it's really right up there with issues like transportation. And we see that to try and get strong investments to any program, any issue area at the state capitol requires a group of stakeholders to really come together, share information, and advocate. And that advocacy piece is critically important. It's also important to, swap stories, and especially when we were in negotiations a few years ago on all the details of the grant program that Brent was talking about earlier, and you're going back and forth about speeds and scalability and those policy decisions. It's essential that we bring all these voices to the table. So because we're creating new policy and new programs at the time, and so it's really important that we have those voices at the table and those perspectives together to craft policy that will work. And then if we find out that, we need to make some tweaks, then we can do that. And so the League, along with other local government groups, as well as education groups, economic development, utilities, rural development authorities, I know a lot of you, listening today are aware, have come together over the last year to more formally, I would say, to help with that message and collect stories and get that feedback on the grant program and other areas that maybe we haven't thought about to improve access across the state.
Thank you. Steve, now townships are really starting to pay attention to broadband, and I'm sure you have that new Office of Broadband map on your wall that shows the broadband coverage by township and the startling amount of unserved area that's out there in the rural townships. Can you talk a little bit about how broadband's gotten to be a key issue for your association?
Yeah, sure can. Again, this is Steve Fenske with the Minnesota Association of Townships. Our organization is kind of similar to what Laura described for the cities, but we do that for townships. In the past, our organization's chief concern was and has been transportation. but in the last couple of years in particular, our members have gotten to the point where broadband is as important to them as transportation when it comes to what they want us to do at the Capitol. And it's because they have just felt left behind for 20 to 30 years here. The map that Bill mentioned was put together by the Office of Broadband Development for a township event where Dan McKenzie of the office was speaking, and it was to try and show that so many townships out there are still in that unserved category. And that map, compared to others, while they rely on the same data points, it tells a really different story because it tells more of the local picture as opposed to the county-wide picture. Service is best where there's population centers, and that makes a lot of sense as far as the marketplace and where providers are able to go. So that map, and those of you can find it on the Office of Broadband Development, kind of shows the story for townships. There's a lot of red on that map, a lot of places that are still unserved. And they don't want to be in that category anymore, and they don't want to wait anymore. So they've really latched onto the broadband grant program as an option, as something that they're going to support and increasingly are participating in.
Steve?
Good. Thanks,
Yeah.
Steve.
Could you speak
You got
up
a
just
little note there that
Yeah, sure can. Yeah.
a little more volume on your part would be helpful.
Basically,
So,
they're latching onto the broadband program and participating in that, and that's what they see as the most promising means of kind of taking control of this themselves. Not always waiting for a provider when the provider happens to go to their location, but working with the provider and saying, what can we do to get you here sooner? And that's reflected in one of the grants awarded for Sunrise Township yesterday or 2 days ago. That's the first time a township that we know of has put up that much money on their own to make this happen for their residents.
good.
And
Well, thanks.
that
And
is,
go ahead. Okay.
I was going to say that's a reflection of how important they're finding this. They're willing to spend their own general fund money and raise new revenues to do it.
Good, good. Thank you for that. Mark Erickson, economic developer for the city of Winthrop, key champion of the RS Fiber project, and board member of the MMUA. What do you think?
Well, I kind of come from this at a different angle. Brent and his membership do a wonderful job with their networks, and they do a great job serving the folks in Minnesota. But they're kind of caught in a transformation of technology from copper to fiber, and their business model just doesn't allow that higher cost investment that people, and now that the townships have awakened to that fact, that fiber investment that needs to be made in rural Minnesota. We are doing that with RS Fiber, and we count very proudly 17 townships as partners in that effort. I just think it's been interesting to watch over the last 4 or 5 years to see people wake up to the idea that broadband is as important in some respects as roads and electricity and water, and how do we find a way to incentivize the providers to make an investment that really kind of goes against their business model. I mean, that's the way the world works. They have to make a return on their investment. And so anything that the state can do, anything that we can do as stakeholders to help everyone understand that problem that we have on investing and get it down the road, I think is great. The Blandin Foundation has been an awakening bell to that, and I think we just need to continue our efforts.
Thanks, Mark. The advocacy group really came up with these priorities as we thought about how do we get the message out and what is it that we want. And so one of the critical things we've talked about is the messaging, the importance of rural broadband, And one of the sites that's out there that's very helpful is the Minnesota Broadband Coalition site that has talks about, and it has a good set of talking points, I'll say, about the importance of broadband. And then I think community people really agree with the industry that the Office of Broadband has been a very, Office of Broadband Development has been a very powerful clearinghouse and a place for solid activity. And to support that, the rural groups agreed that we needed to fund that office at a strong level so that they could do the work that they want to work on, not only infrastructure but adoption and use. The idea to fund the fund, and then to fix the fund. We talked. Brent talked a little bit about the challenge process and some of those things, and then also rights of way as managing those. And rights of way are a credible asset, and making use of those is really important. But cities especially cherish the ability to control what goes into those right of ways and what those things look like. So we'll talk a little bit about those things. Steve, when you talk to, what are the messages that carry for rural township officials and residents about the importance of broadband?
As far as what are they interested in relate to, or what works for them when they talk to others?
Oh, some combination of that.
Okay. A big part of it is just feeling left behind, and that can be compelled by not having the business opportunities that other places have. It can be from their kids not being able to do the homework the same way that kids in a population center do, kids in the same class. It can be increasingly that they can't access medical care online. It's any combination of those. It can even be, for some people, they just want the social and entertainment. And as they discover what else it can be used for, those uses just keep increasing. And just in general, it's that idea they have been left behind, and they don't want to feel that way anymore.
Thank you. Laura? What's your take on the messaging?
I'm sorry, who? Me?
I called on Laura, but Mark's ready to go. So.
Yeah, let's have Mark do it.
Well, to me, the importance of broadband has been stated. I mean, it's just obvious. Its need for healthcare, education, transportation, public safety, manufacturing. It's just all out there. But the importance of messaging is to educate yourself on what the technology is needed to make that happen. And in the years that I've been working at it, it's obvious to me that it's fiber optic lines. And that doesn't mean it's not a combination of fiber to the home or fiber to the farm and wireless, because wireless can be an effective solution in some areas, but it needs to be connected with fiber. And out in our 1,000 square mile footprint of our project, we don't have many fiber endpoints out there for wireless towers. And if you want to deliver 25 meg symmetrical solutions to folks on the farms, which we do, then it has to be fed with fiber. So to me, the messaging is about the education of the technology, and there's a number of counties now who have stepped up and said, we want to build a fiber backbone to all of the communities in our county and leverage that for a phase 2, phase 3, fiber to the home, fiber to the farm. And so I think the message is educate yourself on fiber and understand why it's so important.
And Laura?
I think a lot of what's already been said covers most of it. Just from a practical standpoint with messaging, this was touched on a little bit earlier, but our sort of biggest proponent with broadband was Senator Matt Schmidt, and he was not reelected. and as well as other proponents. And there's also just very practically, there are a number of new legislators this year. There was a number of retirements, and then with it, just all of the legislators being up for re-election. That education piece is critical. We have 23 new House members and 21 new Senate members, which in the Senate side is a pretty good chunk of them. And so having consistent messaging and telling your story is very critical to this issue area. And I think along with, the broadband grants, now that we've had a few rounds, that also is allowing these conversations to happen more. As was mentioned, how important partnerships are, and having those conversations and having a grant program to see as a tool has really allowed some of these conversations to happen, and thinking about what does a partnership look like for our area. And so not only communicating with one another on the community level or with the provider community, but then make sure that's being relayed to your public policy makers, those decision makers at the Capitol.
Good. Laura, why don't you lead off and talk about the Office of Broadband and the 3 priorities that we identified.
Are we all still there, Bill?
Yes.
Did you lose?
Laura, did you hear me?
Bill, are you there?
Yes. Laura?
I don't know.
Hello?
Well, I think Bill maybe is trying to call back in or something, but we can certainly speak to some of the issues that the coalition has been working on that he already outlined, with the Office of Broadband and those 3 points. With Fund the Fund and Fund the Office, it's important to note that this year is the first year of the biennium, and so this year the legislature is pulling together all of the budgets for the state agencies, and so everyone's essentially starting at zero. And that's why we wanted to highlight the importance of continued funding for the Office of Broadband. This has been a really important place for all, stakeholders, and their work is so critically important, and we need to keep this issue on the radar. And so having them at is really a minimum to keep this issue moving forward. The Governor's Broadband Task Force came out with a recommendation of $10 million. And so we have yet to see what the governor's budget will look like. That will come out at the end of this month to see what he will recommend. And then as the state legislature progresses in with their deadlines into February and presenting their budgets, we want to make sure that is included as a budget item. And we've talked already about funding the fund. Again, the Governor's Broadband Task Force came out with a $100 million request per biennium that would be funded for that. We know that the demand is there. That's like many programs. The demand has exceeded the level of funding thus far. But as Brent was talking about, it's not clear that there is going to be a similar appetite this year as there has been in previous years at the legislature for reasons that have been mentioned. Some advocates are no longer there. There's an education curve. And also just thinking about what the legislature refers to as their global agreement, if you will. And that is, you have a lot of other competing interests. There wasn't a transportation bill last year. There wasn't even a tax bill last year. And so we were really fortunate that broadband was one of those items that did get funded. And so there's this joke that there's only anything worse than a budget deficit is a budget surplus, because like I met with a legislator this morning, they could spend that surplus 5 times over. And so it's also just competing with many of those other issues that the state grapples with in trying to solve public policy problems.
Laura, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that message to our legislators when it comes to fund the fund and the amounts you're going to spend is that investing in broadband touches every one of the metrics that they're in office to look over, whether it's manufacturing or healthcare, or education or transportation or public safety. Good access to high-speed broadband is a driver in every one of those areas. So as they spend these funds for broadband, they are positively affecting all of the other areas of the state that they are charged with improving. So I think that's a critical message, that it's just not a road from here to there. It's a road for the future and our children and our businesses and our healthcare. And that's just an incredibly important investment to be made. And now let's talk about rights of way.
Uh-huh.
Hey, there's Bill.
Yeah, I'm here now. Laura, why don't we come back to the rights of way in a few minutes? Steve, do you have anything on the office or the funds?
The office has been a great help. Our organization doesn't have a specific policy related to funding the office, but they have been such a great resource to us that it just goes hand in hand with money in the fund. They really, it's not that we don't approve or disapprove, we just kind of lump them together as they are a necessary part of getting that money in the fund out to the applicants. So we also support increased funding for them to do the many things that they're charged with doing. I think the focus for us this year does look like it's just going to be money in the fund. That's the easiest thing to accomplish, is just keeping the program going. As far as fixing the fund, those are also goals, but I think they're secondary to just making sure that this thing continues on and more residents see the benefits of that.
Laura, when we started talking about the messaging and about the funds and so on, I think that was right at the beginning, and Brent mentioned this about the letters of intent and the purpose of those, and whether those were challenges or whether they were what the letters were that came back from the providers. But I know community members were very discouraged when they saw all those responses to their letters of intent. What's your feel now that we've gone through the grant process, and I know there were some challenges that made adjustments in projects? Do we have a feel for the real impact of the challenge process?
For me, it is a bit early. I plan on having a conversation with the Office of Broadband about the changes that were enacted in law last year and how that, affected their work this year. We did hear from a number of applicants that was in fact the case, that it was cumbersome and that it created some confusion and uncertainty that Brent already alluded to, and we clearly don't want applicants to be discouraged and then create sort of a cycle of, if they're discouraged and they're not applying, well, then it looks like the demand is less. And so that would be a cycle that we wouldn't want to get into, because, we know that the demand is there for these projects and these funds. So we don't want to, stifle any applications coming forward. So that was something we did hear anecdotally. And so we'll need to be gathering information here in the coming weeks now that the grants were awarded yesterday, and have those continued conversations with the Office of Broadband to see what tweaks, if any, we should be making to that challenge process in particular.
It was, in terms of the amount of the fund, any thoughts on that? $35 million, we had higher hopes for that last year, but in comparison to everyone else, that seemed like a pretty good number. It seemed like they were able to spend that money this year and fund about 2/3 of the projects or so. So that was clearly there is a demand for those funds. Any more thoughts on that? On the size of the fund?
This is Steve again. We're advocating for the same $100 million in the fund that the governor asked for last year. And again, if we can resolve any issues with stifling applications, if we find that's happening, we're going to find more projects that want to go forward. And as we connect, more of these places, I think it's going to become easier for the next areas to submit an application. It becomes more feasible. So to me, each year we do this, we're going to increase the number or the possible projects that wouldn't have been feasible in years before because we're increasing the broadband footprint. So I don't see any need to back off what we've got. I think the $100 million could be used. We can certainly use the 35. That was they spent everything they had this year on it.
Good, thanks. Laura or Mark on that question?
Well, I think we need dollars. I was disappointed 2 years ago in FarmFest in Redwood Falls when one of the legislators said they didn't put more money into it because they didn't think there'd be enough demand for it. And of course, we've always seen more demand for the money than is there. And I think it's just a good investment.
And from a perspective, we, certainly understand the competing priorities, but will again be advocating for that $100 million.
Okay. There's a question about whether if there's a consensus that the fund is a popular enough activity that it will continue on. Anyone feel that the very existence of the fund is a question?
Well, Laura would have more insight than that on me. What I have read is some Republican lawmakers are saying it's just not going to be an issue this year. It's kind of been, there's just more, there's bigger problems we need to address. And of course, I don't think there is. And I think, yes, rural communities and counties and townships and businesses and associations need to be ready to raise their voices and say, hey, you've been telling us for 3 years that broadband is one of the top issues in this state, yet each year you fund less than what others want. When are you going to step up and say, hey, this is a good investment, let's improve our state in all aspects? I think we need to be ready to do that, and I think in March we'll have an opportunity.
Steve again. I guess I see it in a more positive light. There is the education challenge that Laura talked about with new legislators, but it feels like there's a momentum and an acceptance that this is working among the legislators that I've talked to. There's still a lot of questions about it. And what's going to happen as far as funding and if anything is going to be changed. But I haven't encountered any resistance to the program itself. It's just a question of how much. And I guess my takeaway, Brent described the situation with Senator Schmidt and some DFL supporters of it and that they lost. And I guess I see the same things, as far as what happened, but I have a different conclusion for it. I don't see their support of broadband as causing that. So I haven't sensed that among legislators that this is a politically charged topic, really.
Okay, good enough. Thank you for that, Laura.
And to piggyback off Steve's comment, I would agree with that last comment that that's not the reason why they lost. But going back to my earlier point, there are just so many competing projects and infrastructure needs across the state. And the great news is that broadband is part of that conversation. It absolutely is. So that's the positive. And because we're involved in the conversation, but you have to still try and make your way to the top and keep it a priority at the legislature. And that's why the continued advocacy and storytelling and organizing amongst communities continues to be vital to keep this program going.
Good. Thanks, Laura. And then, Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about this ongoing efforts here today?
I'm sorry, what, Bill? You kind of broke up there.
Would you like to close us out with this last slide?
Oh, sure. Thank you. That last slide is how can you participate? Well, you stay informed and be informed. Find out what you need to find out. And a great place to do that is just to Google MN Broadband Coalition. It's a wealth of information. And then Ann Tracy does a phenomenal job with her broadband blog. And you should all be tuned into that. She keeps us alerted to what's important. She keeps us educated on what's new. And then, Everett Dirksen, I was told, said once, there's nothing more effective than somebody from my hometown in my office with the facts. And that's the most effective lobbyist there is. And you need to reach out to your legislators. You need to find out who in your community wants to advocate for this. Start a social media campaign. Be loud, be active, be accurate, be sincere. This is something that will help your community. Volunteer to testify, and I don't know who you volunteer to. If it's Laura, if it's to Bill, if it's to Blandin. And then on March 15th, we're going to have a broadband day on the Hill, which is great. There'll be more information coming on that, I'm sure. But this is an important issue, and it's important not just for you and your job today, but it's important for your children, and it's important for your children's children, because these are long-term investments that we need to make in very basic and important infrastructure in our state. And if we want something positive to happen, we have to step up and say to the folks who make the rules, this stuff needs to happen. So I'm willing to help out, and I think we all should be.
I see another question here from a communications expert from Blandin Foundation, Allison Akan, and it's a question to the group. Is broadband still an effective frame, or does the conversation need to start with the healthcare, education, economy, etc. first? And broadband, I've heard some people say, well, forget talking about broadband. We just want a modern telecommunications services, which is a little less technical and more kind of global. And I think the power of our coalition is that we have people from the education or the healthcare, the local government promoting their causes, but then in addition they say, and broadband is an essential part of this. And so that's how our coalition is proceeding. But I always think it's important to lead, and I agree with Allison here, is that if you lead with what you're going to do with this technology, it's more effective than saying, I'd like to have an exercise equipment in my basement. We're talking about the uses of these technologies, uses that can help propel, especially rural Minnesota, forward. I want to thank everyone for participating. I don't see any more questions on the channel. Let people know that this webinar is going to be available for other people to listen to. So look for that web address that will come out on the Blandin blog and probably in an email to you directly as well. Our next webinar, Mary, do you have I'll just turn it over to Mary Magnuson now, and she'll close us out. Mary?
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, and thanks again to Brent, Laura, Steve, and Mark for joining us on the webinar today. And I will download a list of everyone who registered and everyone who's participating on the webinar today, and I will email you a link once it's up on the blog, which will probably be tomorrow. So yes, our next webinar is going to be Thursday, February 9th from 3 to 4, and the topic will be how to be effective at the Capitol. Thanks everyone for attending today's webinar, and have a great rest of your day.